I would like to welcome today documentary filmmaker Harvey Hubbell V. Harvey's films have covered a wide array of subjects and together have won over 50 film and video festival awards as well as 4 Emmys. In 2013, Harvey directed Diskleksia, the movie, a documentary tracing both his own journey with dyslexia as well as its prominence in the United States. Harvey, welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Quinn, thank you. I'm honored to be here.
So the first question I have for you is, when were you first diagnosed with dyslexia?
Well, Quinn, back in the day, it was interesting. It was back in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know, it's a long time ago. And teachers couldn't figure out what was going on. Parents couldn't figure out what was going on. I live in Connecticut. I live close to a little school called Yale, and they were able to diagnose me. And then they sent me back to my elementary school that had no idea what to do with me. And, they figured dyslexics, well, you guys read things backwards. And they put me in they let me sit in the back of the class where I could look out the window and daydream. And because they diagnosed me, didn't mean that they could remediate me or do anything. But I did learn to read outside the school system, which was my saving grace.
And who taught you how to read?
Interestingly enough, because I'm a documentarian, I've been trying to find some of the people who have done that. I know as my third grade teacher, I did a lot of extra work with my third grade teacher. And again, it's one-on-one.
Yeah.
As you know, there's no two dyslexics the same. Mm-hmm. So a one-on-one approach with somebody who is trained, is going to get the kind of results. I'm not sure how trained my third grade teacher was. I know there's another gentleman I was going to see in New Haven back in the day. Mrs. Harder was my third grade teacher, but I can't. I've been trying to find this other guy who actually taught me to read, but it changed my bloody frickin' life.
Harvey, I was just wondering if you could just back up just a little bit. I feel like I have you extra large on the screen right now.
Oh, yeah, back up.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Where'd you go to school?
I grew up in Newtown, Connecticut. I'm a public school baby.
Wow. How do you feel about going to Newtown, having gone to Newtown after what happened?
I went before what happened.
Yeah.
Well, I can go into that, and probably politically I shouldn't. I mean, the thing is about it's about working with people who need the help and doing all the things. So, I don't know. I mean, my family's been in Newtown. My family got in Newtown, founded Newtown a couple hundred years ago.
Yeah. So
I've been there for a long, long time, and it's also kind of a snapshot of where our country and our nation is. Mm-hmm. Stuff to think about on the bigger, in the bigger picture of where we are as a nation and where we are education, and in that regard, and speaking just in my case, the school system didn't have any clue of what to do with a guy like me, so I can't speak for what was happening afterwards.
How were your parents supportive? How did they help you?
Well, again, back in the day, I mean, I think there's a little bit more awareness. I know there's a lot more awareness now. Mm-hmm. And the average parent today doesn't want to hear that, wow, we're doing a lot better than we used to. And in some cases we're not doing much better. In some cases we're doing a lot better. Parents, when they're watching their kids struggle, they don't really want to hear that. They want to see what can happen right now. My mom died when I was a kid, and she wasn't as aware of what was going on with dyslexia. My dad was with me through the whole journey, and in the beginning, when I started making the film Diskleksia, first he was like, hey, this is just some kind of you have a weird place where you are. It's kind of don't use this as a crutch. But then later on, as he watched the film develop and as he watched us meet with the experts and other people, he eventually, his wife came up to me and said, look, he feels he's dyslexic as
Mm-hmm.
well. So, well, I knew he was dyslexic because I had his papers evaluated by experts. So, yeah, I knew the guy was dyslexic. So it's an interesting thing because if you can't see it, if we were dyslexia and we had one leg shorter,
Yeah.
and they would say, "Oh, you're dyslexia," I get it. But because it's dyslexia, and it affects so many people, um, and times have changed so much, I think it's harder for parents to kind of understand and get a grasp of it. First, they need knowledge, which is not to jump ahead too much, but which is one of the reasons we made our film.
Yeah.
It was to enlighten people. So to answer your question, my mom, she didn't know too much about what the heck was going on. My dad didn't know too much what was going on, but eventually ended up getting it.
Yeah. Um, did you go to college?
Oh yeah, I went to some dandy colleges. They threw me all out of each one of them, one way or another. Or I would at the end when I was going to New School and NYU. I ended up working more in the film industry than taking classes. So I eventually kind of put it out of there. Um, there's a university in the great state of Connecticut, which I'm not going to name right now, that when I told them I wanted to be a writer, they pulled my paper up in front of the class and said, they said, "Whose paper is this?" And I raised my hand. They said, "By the time you get to my class, you'll know spelling and punctuation and such and such, such and such." It says, "You, sir, I'm going to ask you to leave the room." And so they kicked me out of that class. So much for writing.
Yeah.
But later I won an Emmy for writing, so I thought that kind of worked out in my favor.
Yeah, I would think it would. Speaking of which, what was the hardest classes for you in high school and college?
Well, the hardest classes in college was pretty easy. I just didn't take any. I mean, taking, by that time I knew I was just taking filmmaking and things that I enjoy.
Hmm.
Um, uh,
But I mean,
you know,
like, we all have to take mandatory classes.
yeah, we had to take, early on, I could not get, well, see, one of the things you and I, haven't talked about, but, my belief is it learning disability or learning difference? In the case of dyslexia, where they have the ability to be able to teach you, and they have to teach you early on.
Hmm.
There's things you should be doing in kindergarten and first grade, second grade, third grade. Again, I'm a filmmaker. I'm not an educator. So they changed me from left-handed to right-handed.
Hmm.
They were trying to teach me to read by color, some kind of a program that they had at the time. Not so. The bottom line was they weren't teaching me how to read. I was falling further and further behind. Once you fall behind in reading,
Hmm.
and then my handwriting was terrible, so I couldn't write. You cannot do science, you cannot do math because you have to be able to read.
Yeah.
So when you want to know which was the worst, I would say they were all neck and neck with like not being very fun at all.
Hmm.
Like the whole entire gamut, I would say really, really was not good. I enjoyed history, which is storytelling, which is great for filmmaking. And so again, once I learned how to read, history was always a strong place, and then reading was a strong place. Mathematics was always something that was incredibly foreign to me.
Hmm.
But I am happy that a couple of years ago, when I was diagnosed again for one of the films, I had a second grade reading math average,
Hmm.
and I doubled it to a fourth grader.
Wow.
So, I mean, how many people that's doubled their math average, right?
Yeah.
Huh? I'm pretty proud of that one.
Well, I mean, I myself, my great math story is that I was taking algebra, and my math teacher, who just so happened to be my guidance counselor at the Gao School, I'm sure you've heard of the Gao School. Um, he actually called home to my mom and said, there are some people who get math and some people who don't get it, and Quinn is one of those people who don't get it. And well, I made sure at the end of the year he'd call my name for the mathematics award.
Nice.
So I proved him wrong.
Nice.
And it's funny you say you love history because I've always adored history, and history was rather hard for me in school. But sometimes I say I actually majored in film and history, just because I study history, mostly family history, but just all areas of history. Just because it's like you said, it's storytelling, and it's really one of the first and oldest ways of how we learned as a race of humans of storytelling, and that was around before writing. So, um,
I'm with you 100% because I mean, and also when you're talking about in studying history, and it's an interesting thing when we're talking because do we have to know how to read or write to hear a story? I mean, a long time ago, the very first films were made in a cave in France when they had a woolly mammoth and everybody was painting it and they're doing stuff and they were telling stories. And then as you're talking about family history, you got to remember that if you're looking at pictures and you're looking at times, well, let's see, pictures started in what year? In 1860s was the American Civil War, and
Yep.
there was pictures just before that. What kind of clothes were they wearing? Which model cars came in there? So a lot of stuff happens to that we pick up a lot of cues all the time. And I know a lot of the people in the LD community of how they will pick up various different signals. You got to remember, as you were saying, when you're talking about the species, the human tribe, we all work together. Nobody lives in a cave by themselves. We all work together and we all feed in different pieces of information. So it's kind of interesting of our passions that we have, and then what are our strengths in those passions.
And speaking of which kind of leads me to my next question: what inspired you to make the film Diskleksia?
Well, it's kind of when you've been painfully misunderstood long enough. I mean, I've done every kind of like wrong, crazy, bad decision in TV and film. I've worked on independents and majors and public broadcasting and news and sports and commercials. I made a lot of good money in commercials, but and that's like film lies, but documentaries are film truth.
Yeah.
So once you get really good at storytelling, and we're really good, we have a whole bunch of people here that we tell good stories, and we know how to make the scene look good, and more importantly, know how to be able to tell the story. Well, once I knew that I was going to spend more time in documentaries than any place else, then the story of dyslexia, like a story that you really know. And just because I am dyslexic, doesn't mean that I know anything about dyslexia.
Yeah.
So, I went to go find some neuroscientists and educators, and I figured if I could understand what they were talking about, then anybody could understand what they were talking about. And I wanted to make movies for grandmas, so grandpas, and parents, just as you were saying before, parents could understand it, and kids could understand it, and educators could understand it. And, we wanted to make a film so simple that even policymakers could understand it. And we believe that's what we did when we put that story together. That film has been used an awful lot of times just to break the ice for people to kind of understand. And often people say, oh, yeah, I'm dyslexic. My son's dyslexic. My dad was dyslexic. But again, going back to an invisible difference, a lot of people don't necessarily pick that up.
I don't know if you ever saw, I did a documentary with HBO that I co-produced based on my book, Growing Up, Learning Disabled, and, other adventures. Mm-hmm. And I went to HBO and said, I'd love to make a documentary on this. And they decided to call it I Can't Do This, But I Can Do That. Yep. Which kind of goes back to referring to what you were saying. If I can understand it, then anybody can understand it, and that's the philosophy that I use as well.
Remember that? That's old school.
Yeah.
You made that a while ago. That's good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And I'm actually doing another documentary with HBO about my dad now. And I think if this goes well, then I may have a career in filmmaking. And it's really interesting how a lot of dyslexics tend to go into filmmaking because in the end, yeah, there's a lot of reading, but in the end, it's simple storytelling. You're telling a story, and that's seems to be very easy for us, and especially if you're Irish like I am.
There you go. Yeah, especially that makes it even easier. But you know what? It's like Dr. Sylvia Richardson, who was a friend of mine years and years ago, said, every time I'm interviewed, on TV for dyslexia, the camera people come up and say, "Hey, lady, I think I got that."
Yeah.
But let's think about this on when our mind is still, and you can, you say, because it is thinking in pictures, but it's also thinking in sound and singing. There'd be great music here, and then you hear voiceovers, you hear the words,
Yep.
but our society tells us by people who process really differently, you're not supposed to tell them you hear voices and you hear music because they think you're bloody crazy. Yet, what's the future? The future is all going to be about content. The days of selling steel and timber and all kinds of other stuff as being the biggest thing we're exporting are gone.
Yeah.
Now the biggest thing is content. It's the movies we make. It's the music we make. It's content. It's our mind, and that's where our future is going to be. I mean, I still kind of like steel and timber, but content of the mind, not bad. So it's always kind of interesting when people, if you're cautious about talking about music you hear during a scene, just write it down.
Yeah.
And the same thing with voiceovers, like what people should say. It sounds great. I love it.
It's funny you say you like steel and timber. I do too, if you know what I mean. With all this technology and everything, and they're supposed to, and I guess once you understand it, it's supposed to help us in general. But I think what people don't really realize is that when you're dealing with a dyslexic, it's almost like you're coming from the steel and timber era, into the new one. And I've always felt like I'm from a different time in a lot of ways. And you have to teach me how these things work. And when you're teaching somebody from this era, you teach them and then they get it. But if you teach them, say even somebody like your grandfather, you have to teach them over and over and over and over again, and they still might not even get it just because they didn't grow up with it. But nowadays, babies, my girlfriend's 4-year-old, knows how to work iPads and iPhones, and it's amazing. But at the same time, it shows you how we can adapt to technology and how easy we can learn it.
No, I think you're 100% right. And also, you got to remember that, as you said, a couple of generations ago, it wasn't like this at all. And think about the school systems like that. And think of what our grandparents and our great-grandparents, the world they were living on. And if you were a fisherman and you did not know how to read, so the majority of sailing schools in England come out of are run by dyslexics. Huh. So I'm not saying that you don't have to read to sail a ship, but you're reading the clouds, you're reading the waves, and you're seeing other things. Going back to what we were talking about with our love of history or other things. So it's the observation of stuff that cannot be taught in school.
Yeah.
So many of the successful people in our world come from dyslexic families who probably could not survive in the modern world or in a university, but they've run factories, they've run like a fishing ship. Yeah. Like when you're eating that fish at night, are you saying, "Geez, I wonder if the captain of this ship could really read really well or whatever"? It's like, no, you care about the fact that the captain found the fish. Or the same thing with the people who've grown up in a factory who are producing a really good product because that's what they're supposed to do. So, I think we're, if we all hold tight and we all work together on this, people are going to respect the multiple intelligence that work for our species and how it literally does take a village for us to be able to run our cities, run our nations, run our schools. It really does, and that's why it's a great place to be in the United States with democracy, where at least we believe we can we have the right to be able to come in and say, hey, can we fix this? Can we try it this way? Can we do this way? Can we do that way? And the reason it's successful is because it works. Because people are all different.
It's funny you say a lot of dyslexics basically run the fishing world, because I basically come from mercantile families. And one of the families I come from, their name was Crown and Shield, which is my middle name and my dad's middle name. And the guy, I think he was my fifth grade uncle or something like that, he built a very famous ship called Cleopatra's Barge, which was the first yacht in America. And I finally discovered somewhere he was illiterate until he was 40 years old. And that's when he started, teaching himself how to read. He couldn't read, but he ended up building the first yacht in America. And because of that, we have, maritime trade in America. And he's founded some of the great trading routes to Europe and everything like that. And there's a famous book written about it. He couldn't read, but he knew how to build a ship, and he knew how to make a lot of money doing that.
Well, if you look at the statistics of how many people go to school nowadays and how many people never went to school back in the days, so reading is an important thing that they can make money off of us by having us read, and we need a more of an educated. Right now, we're in a big flux of what's going on in our world, and so for parents who are listening to this and they're thinking about, what are we going to do with our son or daughter, it's really, in investing in them and investing in what their passions are, and sure, they have to work on where they can do improvement, but also let them, what are they naturally good at?
Yeah.
My good friend Diana King, I used to always say, what's your superpower? And Diana says, what are the 2 or 3 things you do well? And so you model your life on the 2 or 3 things that you do well. And it's not bad. And you'll find happiness in that as well. And isn't that actually the goal, Quinn? Is to find happiness?
Absolutely. What has been the response of your film?
Well, it's getting to be, it's kind of we wanted to make an evergreen film. We wanted to make a film that it takes a long time to pull together a good film, especially when you're an independent and you don't have a lot of cash.
Mm-hmm.
So, for us, we did it by any means necessary. And so in the course of making the film, we kind of met a lot of communities. And you got to remember, the Decoding Dyslexia moms weren't even around in the beginning of our journey. The IDA has always been around, and we, for us, so we would show it at an IDA gathering, or would show bits and pieces of it as we were building it, and same with the LDA. And eventually, it became, when we went off on tour back in 13 or 14, and we did quite an extensive tour. And then you can still get the film now on Tug, and it's a great community film to watch with other concerned citizens in your area. So, I mean, I don't want to say it's a conversation starter, but it certainly brings people to the table. So again, we made an evergreen film that you could show to people, and it's as true today as it was when we made it. And it's going to be just as true a couple of years from now. That dyslexia is not a death sentence. You just have to understand how people process.
I read somewhere, and I was actually watching a TEDx video of this neuroscientist, and she was basically saying that reading is something that we forget that reading is something that does not come naturally to the human brain. We have to teach ourselves. And people who actually have dyslexia are actually living documentation, if you will, of how the brain lived during the caveman times, and during the Neanderthals and everything like that. In the sense that they didn't know how to read. They basically had their own language, and they communicated by pictures, and they communicated by certain symbols and everything like that. And I just thought that was actually really an interesting point.
Yeah, well, there was 2,000 of us in the entire species back in the day, and we've somehow learned to populate, every part of the globe. I mean, including Antarctica, where we, get parkas and we go sit down there, and So humans are. I mean, humans are interesting people. You can quote me on that.
Yeah.
But the whole idea is, like when you and I were talking about the observation, which is not a bad thing for a hunter-gatherer to do, or a farmer, but it's really not bad for a scientist to do observation. It's not bad for a teacher to do. It's not bad for a public leader to do. So part of those things, which are a survival mechanism for a human being, are just really important things that we just can't let dull our senses now in this age where we got to go outside. Take your kids out and have adventures with them. Go outside. We're doing a couple different projects, but one of the things we're doing now, kids that go to kindergarten could have a 32 million word gap between kids who've been exposed to going to parks and libraries and marinas and fairs and all kinds of stuff, going to grandmother's house and going to friends' houses and going to people who are different from the way that their family does things, to the kids who have not been exposed to that. 32 million words by the time you get to kindergarten. That sets you off to a huge advantage or disadvantage of what's going on. Forget the fact if you're dyslexic or not. And remember that each of us are unique little souls. So if any of these kids are like, how they're picking up information, it might not be like information sent, might not be information received. Allow these kids to kind of pick it up any way they want. And whether that's a caveman brain or just, the advanced surviving brain, it's a journey, and life's meant to be experienced. And if we can read or if we can't read, I'm big into reading and writing, but there's so much assistive technology out there now.
Yeah.
I would much rather have a kid learn to read than absorb everything from monitors and all kinds of other things. But as you're saying, you're going back into looking at your family history, and you understand things, so you really get it a lot of different ways. You're sitting at a table, you're picking it up, when people are talking, you're seeing it, you're doing it. You might hold the shoe, the gun, the harpoon of somebody in your family, and that's a multi-sensory education, and that's whether it's Neanderthal or Homo sapien or whatever. It's our species does learn in a multisensory way, and we just have to be cautious when we are sending our kids into school that the kids are going to learn for the best way for them.
Yeah. What would you say to aspiring young filmmakers? What advice would you give them?
I would just say just do it, right? There's so much. Nowadays there's this thing called YouTube, and there's all of this information.
Hey, Harvey, actually, would you mind doing that again? Because I think somebody just went up the stairs there. So if you don't mind just letting me re-ask the question, what advice would you give to young aspiring filmmakers? I
think just doing it. I think in the world of where we're living now, where everybody has access to cameras, kids have watched. If they're plopped down in front of a screen, I just heard this, people are in front of a screen for 7 hours a day in the United States of America. 7 hours a day. Let's make that useful. So let's see what good framing is. So let's do good framing. Let's make sure our sound is good. Let's make sure that we understand a beginning, middle, and end of a story. So kids are practicing that stuff for thousands of hours. You heard of the 10,000 hour rule, where if you do it for 10,000 hours, you're good at it. So we have a group of people who are watching, hopefully good frame shots and good frame stories. So then if they're in school already, they're learning. Then all you have to do is just do it. Just tell your own stories. I remember my daughter doing stop motion animation when she was a kid, and how cute she was and doing it. And those were a lot of fun. And she's a film major right now. So the thing is, just do it. And you have, with 7 hours of people viewing screen, you're going to have an audience. You're going to have people, you can show it to your grandparents first, and eventually other people are going to be wanting to see it. So it's just do it and produce. And again, going back to what does our nation or what is our world going to be trading in? And that's content. And what is content? It's the stuff that comes out of our brain. It's our imaginations.
What's next for you in life?
I'm going to have lunch after this. Well, we are, because of the distribution situation in filmmaking, we've made a lot of good, important films. Distribution themselves is a little bit harder. So we're doing a couple different things. And one of the things is we started a subscription site, which is called seedling.tv. And that's not up, and on today's date, it's not up. It will be up in a matter of weeks. So seedling.tv is one way to see us. You can also check out what we're doing on Facebook. And of course, you can always check out what we're doing with and the Diskleksia, the movie sites, which usually, we ask people if they want to be on our mailing list, and then we can kind of tell them. So there's a lot of projects that are going on. And again, with the kind of, my friends that I have who are educators, who are master educators, one of the things we want to be able to do is get films out for in-service day for teachers, where they can, take somebody like Diana King, who I've known, the founder of Kildonan, who was a dear friend of ours, and she teaches cursive handwriting. And come on, don't you want to learn cursive handwriting by an 89-year-old educator who came from England, who sounds like Mother Goose, and the Queen talking at the same time, and learn your cursive handwriting that way? Well, not everybody can get Diana. Luckily, people can get Diana to come to their schools and talk to them. But for a lot of different reasons, she can't get to everybody's school. But because we have videotapes of her, now we can get her out to more places. It's good. It's not like having Diana in your school, but it's better than not having Diana in your school. So we're going in a lot of directions like that. We're going to integrative medicine. We're doing a lot of things coming up on nutrition, on health, incorporating all of those things together, and that'll all be on seedling.tv. And we're always open for new ideas, for people to write to us and tell us, hey, we got this connection. We'd love to collaborate. We'd love to have partnerships with people.
Harvey, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely no problem, Quinn. Come up and visit us on the farm sometime, next time you're heading north.
I'd love to.